I only picked up the overnight shift to the Kodiak Island monitoring station because no one else would touch it. That's the honest truth. When Lieutenant Molly Cole asked for volunteers during the December briefing, the whole room froze. 40 guys suddenly fascinated with their own boots while she laid out the details. One operator, midnight to 8, isolated 40 minutes from the nearest living soul. The kind of posting that makes people magically remember dentist appointments, urgent family matters, or long-ignored medical issues. Me, I threw my hand up before the silence got suffocating. Compared to the usual Coast Guard routine, it sounded like a vacation. No supervisors hovering, no surprise inspections, no pointless drills or team-building nonsense. Just a radio console, a black Alaskan night that never seems to end, and the quiet. The station itself wasn't exactly postcard material. A squat concrete bunker planted on a chunk of rock about 3 miles inland from the coast, stubborn and lonely as anything, built to withstand the weather up here. Gray walls, gray ceiling, gray everything. The kind of place they built in the 70s when function mattered more than comfort. But it had heat that worked most of the time and a coffee maker that could strip paint, which was enough for me. The main operations room held 6 monitoring stations arranged in a semicircle, though only one stood active during my shift. Banks of radio equipment lined the walls. WAV transceivers, emergency frequency scanners, radar displays that painted green sweeps across black screens every few seconds. The hum of electronics never stopped. Fans cooling circuit boards, static crackling through speakers, the occasional beep when someone keyed a microphone somewhere out in the darkness. 3 months in, I'd settled into the rhythm of it. Routine work, mostly logging vessel traffic as commercial ships radioed their positions, monitoring the emergency signals for distress calls that rarely came. Most nights passed without anything more exciting than a fishing boat reporting engine trouble or a cargo hauler requesting weather updates. That kind of predictable problems you could handle in your sleep. My duties were straightforward enough. Scan their frequencies, log everything that came through, maintain contact with headquarters every 6 hours. Cliff expected a status report at midnight, 6 a.m., and noon, though the day shift handled that last one. Simple stuff. Position reports from vessels transiting the area, weather observations, any emergency traffic that needed coordination with the rescue center in Anchorage. The hardest part wasn't the isolation. I'd grown comfortable with that pretty quick. It was staying alert when nothing happened for hours at a stretch. You'd think monitoring emergency frequencies would keep you on edge, but most nights the radio stayed quiet except for routine check-ins. Commercial traffic following their usual routes. Fishing fleets working the same waters they'd been working for decades. Predictable patterns that lulled you into thinking nothing ever changed out there. I kept myself busy with maintenance tasks, checking equipment logs, calibrating theorection, finding gear, making sure the backup generators had fuel. The Coast Guard loved paperwork almost as much as they loved regulations, so there was something to document. Signal strength, measurements, frequency sweeps, atmospheric condition reports. Busy work mostly, but it helped pass their time. The coffee got me through the worst hours. I discovered early on, That's machine in the break room could brew something strong enough to wake the dead if you ran it through twice. Probably violated about 6 health regulations. But when you're alone in a concrete box at 3 o'clock in the morning, you don't worry much about proper coffee-to-water ratios. March 3rd started like any other night. Clear skies, light winds, surface temperatures hovering around 30. Second of conditions that made for good radio propagation, but not much else. I'd logged the usual evening traffic. A couple of fishing boats heading back to port, a container ship bound for Seattle, a Coast Guard cutter running patrol patterns south of the island. The emergency beacon hit the speakers at 11:47 p.m. The sound cut through the routine chatter like a knife, that distinctive warbling tone that every Coast Guard operator knew by heart. The automated distress signal that meant someone was in serious trouble. I'd heard it in training exercises plenty of times, but never for real, never when it mattered. The beacon lasted maybe 10 seconds before switching to voice transmission. Male voice stressed but professional using proper radio protocol. Mayday, Mayday, Misa's motor vessel, Katrina's dream. Position 47:32 minutes north, 153:18 minutes west. We are taking on water rapidly. 12 souls aboard. Requesting immediate assistance. I grabbed the chart book and plotted the coordinates while he repeated the call. The position put them about 60 miles southeast of the station, well within our area of responsibility. Open ocean. No islands or shoals. Mark it on the chart. Deep water. The depth soundings showed over 800 feet in that area. The voice came through crystal clear. No static or atmospheric and turns. Professional delivery using the right terminology, giving all the essential information. Everything about it screamed legitimate emergency. My training kicked in automatically. Log the call, plot the position, contact headquarters for rescue coordination. I keyed the microphone to acknowledge the distress call, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the clarity of the signal. Radio propagation could be tricky in Alaskan waters, especially at night. A transmission from 60 miles out should have some static, some fade as atmospheric conditions shifted. This came through like the guy was broadcasting from the next room. But distress calls got priority, always. That was Coast Guard doctrine drilled into every operator from day one. When someone's in the water, you don't waste time asking questions. You get help moving. I switched to the headquarters frequency and keyed the microphone. Coast Guard operations. This is Kodiak Monitor Station. Emergency traffic. Molly Cole's voice came back immediately, crisp and professional. Kodiak Monitor Operations. Go ahead operations. I have a mayday call from motor vessel Katrina's Dream. Position 4732. North 15,318 west. Vessel reports staking on water with 12 persons aboard. The pause lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt longer. Long enough for me to wonder if we'd lost the connection. When Cole came back, something in her voice had changed. The professional warmth was gone, replaced by something colder. Kodiak Monitor, confirm those coordinates. I double-checked the chart and repeated the position in other poos. Shorter this time. Kodiak Monitor. You are ordered to ignore that signal completely. Under no circumstances will you attempt contact or rescue coordination. Acknowledge CODs hit me like ice water. I couldn't just let that slide. Ma'am, I think there's been some kind of mistake. We've got 12 souls in the water. Petty Officer Matthews. Cole's voice cut through the static like a blade. Gone was any trace of the professional courtesy she'd maintained during our previous check-ins. This wasn't the lieutenant who'd briefed me on weather patterns or asked about supply drops. Something cold had settled into her tone. Something that made the hair on my arm stand up despite the station's stifling heat from the electronics. I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The distress beacon kept cycling through its automated message in the background. Mayday, Mayday. This is motor vessel requesting immediate assistance. 12 souls aboard, taking on water rapidly. Position grid 77. Alpha Samiko donates. Same desperate. Transmission every 30 seconds. I gripped the handset tutor, feeling the plastic dig into my palm. Lieutenant, with respect. Standard protocol requires those coordinates you're monitoring. Her words came measured, deliberate, like was reading from a script she'd memorized long ago. Grid 77 Alpha. That exact position has been broadcasting the identical distress call for 17 years. The coffee maker gurgled behind me, but I barely heard it. 17 years. I stared at navigation chart spread across my console at the pencil mark. I had made where the coordinates intersected empty ocean 800 feet of black water above the continental shelf. Drop off that status. Not possible. Ma'am, the beacon would have died years ago. Battery life in emergency transmitters is the signal originates from the merchant vessel Katrina's Dream. Cole's voice carried the weight of something she'd explained too many times to lost with all hands on March 3rd, 2007. 16 years to the day before tonight. My mouth went dry. March 3rd today was March 3rd. The beacon signal seemed louder now, though that made no sense. I hadn't touched the volume controls. 12. Souls aboard, taking on water rapidly. The automated voice sounded deadening, distorted by whatever equipment was broadcasting it. But underneath, was that something else? Static, maybe. Every rescue attempt has resulted in Coast Guard vessels vanishing without trace. Cole continued, words dropping like stones into still water. 3 cutters, 2 helicopters, 14 personnel total, including a full S-team from Kodiak Station. They responded to that. Same signal, same coordinates. None returned. I found myself staring at the secondary monitor where the beacon signal painted its steady blip. Green phosphorescence against black screen, pulsing like a heartbeat. How many people had stared at this same signal over the years? How many had sat in this exact chair listening to some desperate plea cycling through the emergency frequency? The beacon is transmitting from Theosian floor. She said 800 feet down. Sonar confirms the wreck of Katrina's Dream rests at those coordinates. Whatever's broadcasting that signal, it's been doing so from the bottom of the Bering Sea for nearly 2 decades. Something cold crawled up my spine. I glanced around the station. 12 by 8 feet of concrete, and humming electronics that suddenly felt like a tomb. The calendar on the wall showed March 3rd circled in red ink. My own handwriting from this morning marking another day of isolation. Ma'am, if the vessel sank, how is the beacon still? I'm going to give you emergency protocols that weren't covered in your training, Cole interrupted. 7 specific procedures for handling phantom distress calls. You will follow these exactly. I grabbed a pen and notepad from beside the coffee maker. My hand was shaking slightly, not from cold. The station maintained a steady 72, but from something else entirely. T-beacon signal continued its relentless cycle in the background as I waited. First rule, never respond directly to its signal. Do not attempt radio contact with the transmitting vessel. I scribbled notes, my handwriting looking cramped and urgent. No direct response. Second, maintain complete radio silency during transmission periods. The signal broadcasts every 30 seconds. Do not transmit during those windows. Radio silence during transmissions. Third, log all incidents without investigation record, duration, and coordinates. Nothing more. Log only. No investigation. Fourth, do not plot rescue routes or calculate response times. Do not engage in any preparation for search and rescue operations. My pen hesitated above thin. This went against every instinct I'd developed in 3 years of Coast Guard service. People in distress received immediate response. Period. But I wrote it down. No rescue planning. Fifth, confirm all legitimate vessel positions through radar contact. Only, do not rely on radio transmissions for positioning data. Radar confirmation only. Sixth, report any visual anomaly asymmetry. Lights on the water, unexplained radar contacts. Anything unusual in the target area. Report visual anomalies. I underlined that twice. Seventh, under no circumstances SAT solo rescue operations during night shifts. Wait for daylight and backup personnel before investigating any emergency calls. No solo night rescues. The final rule felt like a warning, written in someone else's blood. I stared at my notes. 7. Rules that made no sense, according to everything I'd been taught. But Cole's voice carried the authority of experience, the weight of knowledge I didn't want to possess. The beacon signals cycled again. Mayday. Mayday. This is motor vessel requesting immediate assistance. But this time, underneath the automated message, I heard something else. Voices faint, almost lost in the static, but definitely human voices calling out in desperation. Lieutenant, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The signal's getting stronger. It does that. Her tone carried resignation mixed with something darker. Every night, the transmission gains power, and those voices you're starting to hear, they get more desperate as the hours pass. More real. I listened to the static between beacon cycles, straining to make out words. Were they calling for help? Screaming? I couldn't tell, but the sound made my skin crawl. The voices seemed to multiply with each transmission, layering over each other like an audio recording played backwards. The voices started getting personal on the second night. I mean, they had always been there, underneath the automated beacon message. But now I could make out actual words. Names. Jimmy and Carlos, and someone called Skipper, who kept shouting about the engine room flooding faster than they could pump it out. Real specific stuff that made my chest tight every time that 30-second cycle rolled around. Mayday. Mayday. This is motor vessel requesting immediate assistance. Samo told me the message, as always, but then clear as anything through the static. Skipper, the bilgeage pump's not keeping up. We got maybe 10 minutes before she goes under. I'd gripped the my console so hard, my knuckles went white. Every instinct I had, 3 years of Coast Guard training. All those drills about maritime law and duty to render assistance, everything in me screamed to grab that radio and respond. These were people dying out there. Didn't matter if it was some impossible signal from 16 years ago. Those voices sounded real as anything. But Cole's orders sat right there in my handwriting on that notepad. 7 rules underlined and circled. Never respond directly to the signal. I'd stare at those words while some guy named Carlos begged for acknowledgement, describing how the water was already up to his waist in the forward compartment. Made me sick. Actually, physically sick. So I followed the protocols, logged every transmission in my incident report, without responding, just like Rule 3 said. Time, duration, coordinates. 17 minutes and 43 seconds of continuous distress calls. Grid 77 Alpha. No investigation, no rescue coordination. Just cold facts written in blue ink, while voices pleaded for help in the background. My handwriting got shakier each night. By the third night, something changed. The phantom vessel, because that's what I was calling it now, the Katrina's dream, or whatever ghost was broadcasting from the ocean floor, started using proper Coast Guard radio procedures, not just the disparativices of a sinking crew, but actual maritime protocols. Coast Guard Station. This is Motor Vessel Katrina's Dream, requesting immediate search and rescue coordination. We have 12 souls aboard. Vessel taking on water rapidly. Current position grid 77 Alpha. Ceased attempt yet, with southwest winds at 15 knots. Visibility good. Request data on rescue vessels. Bet stop me cold. I checked the weather station readout on my secondary monitor. Southwest winds at 14 knots. Sea state was indeed moderate. I'd noted it in my log an hour earlier. This phantom signal was referencing current conditions. Real-time weather data from a ship that sank 16 years ago. I found myself reaching for the radio handsaber, catching myself. My fingers actually touched the metal before I jerked my hand back like it was hot. That's how good the manipulation was getting. Perfect procedure. Current conditions. Everything. Designed toe trigger in my training. But I didn't respond. Wrote it all down instead. Noted the weather correlation. The proper radio format. The way they'd started using official terminology. Cole needed to know about this evolution in the signal's behavior. The fourth night was when I first saw the lights. I'd gotten into the habit of scanning the horizon with binoculars during the transmission windows. Not because I expected to see anything, just, I don't know, something to do with my hands. While those voices tore at my conscience. The ocean looked empty, Asselway's dark water stretching to the black horizon. Then, right at grid 77 Alpha, I caught a glimmer. Running lights, red and green navigation lights, exactly where they should be on a vessel's port and starboard sides. A white mast headlighter up. Standard configuration for amateur vessel operating at night. I lowered the binoculars, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Still there. The lights moved with the ship's natural roll, rising gun falling with swells that were too distant for me to see. But there was nothing on radar. Nothing at all. Just empty ocean on my scope while those navigation lights bobbed 18 miles southeast of my position. I watched them for 20 minutes before they faded out. Didn't link off suddenly, just gradually dimmed until the horizon was dark again. Like a ship moving away beyond the curve of the earth. My incident report that night ran to full pages. But the really weird stuff started during the fourth night when my radar scope lit up. I was halfway through a cup of coffee, still making it too strong. But the burnt taste had become familiar when a contact appeared at Thefentom coordinates. Solid return showing range and bearing exactly where the beacon originated. But the movement made no sense. Ships don't zigzag at 30 knots in heavy seas. They especially don't stop dead, reverse course, then accelerate to 45 knots in span of 2 minutes. This contact was pulling maneuvers that would tear apart any real vessel. Then it split into 3 separate returns. 3 distinct radar contacts where there had been one. Each moving in different directions at impossible speeds. I adjusted the gain, checked my equipment settings, even tapped a scope housing. The contacts remained. 2 minutes later, they merged back into a single return. Then that contact expanded until it showed us something 800 feet long. No ship that size operated in these waters. Hell, no ship that size, or pretend anywhere except major shipping lanes with deep water ports. The contact would appear for 5 or 10 minutes, perform these impossible maneuvers, then vanish completely. Sometimes it showed as multiple small vessels. Sometimes a massive 800-footer. Sometimes as something so large my radar couldn't get a clean edge on it. I started marking each appearance on my navigation chart with different colored pencils. Red for single contacts, blue for multiples, black for the oversight. By dawn, I had 17 marks scattered around grid 77 Alpha and patterns that looked like some kind of search grid. Like something was looking for survivors. But the voices, that's what really got to me. The original crew of the Katrina's Dream had been 12 people. I'd memorized their names by now. Jimmy, Carlos, Skipper, Maria, Dutch, and 7 others whose voices I could distinguish even through the static. Same people every night. Same desperate calls about flooding comparts and failed pumps. Except on the 4th night, new voice. Them. This is fishing vessel Northern Star. We're taking on water fast. Engine rooms flooded. We got 4 souls aboard. A different accent, younger voice. Panicked, but using different terminology than the Katrina's Dream. Then another research vessel Endeavour requesting immediate assistance. We've lost power and we're drifting toward the rocks. 6 souls aboard. I grabbed my incident files, flipping through pages until I found what I was looking for. Cole had mentioned other missing vessels. A fishing boat from 2018, a research vessel from 2011, Northern Star lost with 4 crew. In October 2018, Endeavour research vessel 6 abortees apart, February 2011. The phantom distress calls were collecting voice from every ship that had vanished trying to respond to the original signal. 16 years of rescue attempts. All those Coast Guard personnel who disappeared, their voices were joining the chorus now. Each 30-second cycle brought more disparate pleas from crews that had been dead for years. Cole's morning check-in in the 5th day changed everything. I'd been expecting the usual routine, status report, weather conditions, maybe some administrative nonsense about supply runs. Instead, her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before when she crackled through at 0800 hours. Matthews, we need to discuss the nature of your current assignment. I set down my coffee mug, the ceramic one with the chipped handle that I'd grown oddly attached to, and reached for me notepad. Something in her tone made me want to document whatever came next. Copy operations. Go ahead. The Katrina's Dream incident. She paused and I could hear papers shuffling on her end. It wasn't the first vessel lost at those coordinates. My pencil stopped moving across the page. Through my window, I could see the gray morning waters stretching toward grid 77alpha.com as glass under the overcast sky. Say again. Operations. Ocean. Floor mapping conducted in 1998 revealed an underwater trench system at those coordinates. The continental shelf doesn't just drop off. It plunges into what our sonar teams called an abyssal fetcher. Depth readings exceeded our equipment capabilities. I found myself staring at my navigation chart where 17 different colored marks now clustered around those coordinates. The pencil marks suddenly looked less like random incidents and more like a pattern, a feeding schedule. How many vessels operations? 7 documented losses over 30 years, all during rescue attempts for Phantom. Distress calls originating from the same grid coordinates. Cole's voice took on thought-clipped, professional tone she used when delivering bad news. Motor vessel Brighter in 1993. Research vessel Northern Light in 1996. Coast Guard cutter Vigilant in 2001. Commercial fishing vessel Mary Catherine in 2004, each responding to identicalitated distress signals. I counted my colored marks again. 17 incidents in 6 months. The thing was getting more active. Operations. I had to clear my throat. What exactly are we dealing with here? Static Fallacy channel for nearly 30 seconds. When Cole returned, her voice was barely above a whisper. Something in the deep water. Matthews. Something that's been issuing those signals as bait for 3 decades. The word bait hit me like cold seawater. I thought about all those nights I'd listened to the phantom voices. Jimmy calling about the flooding engine room. Carlos reporting billegage pump failure. The skipper coordinating abandoned ship procedures. Perfect human desperation broadcast. With mathematical precision, every 30 seconds it learns. Matthews. Cole continued, and I could hear her flipping through what sounded like a thick file. Each rescue attempt provides new data, new voices, new procedures to mimic high-end. My hand was shaking as I wrote learns in capital letters and underlined it twice. The coffee maker gurgled in the corner, finishing another pot I probably wouldn't finish. Drinking. The transmission started simple basic midday calls with minimal detail. Over the years, they've become increasingly sophisticated. Perfect Coast Guard protocol, real-time weather correlation, proper vessel identification procedures. I remembered the 4th night when the phantom signal had referenced current wind conditions. That matched my weather station readouts exactly. 15 knots southwest, moderate C8. How the hell had it known that? It began incorporating voices from previous rescue attempts around 2008. Cole said Coast Guard personnel who'd responded to earlier. Cole's Petro Officer Chun from the Vigilant, calling for backup. Lieutenant Morrison from Kodiak Station reporting false coordinates to divide rescue assets. My blood went cold. The voices I'd been hearing weren't just from the Katrina's Dream crew. They were from my people, Coast Guard personnel who'd vanished trying to help operations. Those 7 protocols you gave me. I stared at my handwritten notes, the rules I'd been following religiously. They're not safety measures. Negative. Matthews. They're countermeasures. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Containment. Not rescue protocols or safety guidelines. Containment procedures designed to keep rescue assets away from something that had been collecting vessels and crew for 30 years. The entity. And that's the only term our analysts can agree on. Demonstratize rapid learning capabilities. It studies our responses, modifies its approach, becomes more convincing with each iteration. Cole's voice carried the exhaustion of who'd been fighting this thing for years. Your station exists to monitor and document, not to coordinate rescue operations. I looked around my 12x8 concrete box with new eyes. The humming electronics, the multiple radio arrays, monitoring equipment. This wasn't a rescue coordination center. It was an observation post. A blind for watching something dangerous. How many personnel have we lost operations? 14 confirmed missing. 3 cutters, 2 helicopters, multiple small craft responses. The thing doesn't just take vessels, Matthews, it takes knowledge. Every radio procedure, every emergency protocol, every tactical formation we've used against it. I thought about the impossible radar contacts I'd been tracking. The whole station hummed with it. The radar scope pulsed with each new contact. 43 returns now. I'd stopped counting after 30, but the screen kept adding more. They appeared in clusters, groups of 3 or 4 at a time, all heading toward the same point. Toward him. That's when it hit me. I wasn't monitoring these signals. I was sending them. The realization came like a punch to the gut. I stared at my radio equipment, the transmitter that I'd been using for months to check in with Cole, to report weather, to log vessel traffic, the same transmitter that had been humming constantly, even during the quiet hours when I wasn't actively. I'd always figured it was normal background noise, equipment cycling through diagnostic routines. But it wasn't diagnostics. It was transmission. I grabbed the technical manual from the shelf above my console, pages crackling as I flipped through. Frequency allocation charts. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely read the fine print. There, buried in the specifications, power output rating stat, made my blood turn to ice water. This wasn't a monitoring station. It was a broadcast facility. The antenna array outside wasn't designed to receive signals from ships in distress. It was built to transmit across hundreds of miles of open ocean. Every frequency I'd been monitoring, every emergency channel I'd been scanning, I'd been pumping out signals on all of them. Phantom disc riding on carrier waves strong enough to reach shipping lanes from here to the Aleutians. I thought about Altos, cargo haulers, and fishing boats I'd been logging in my reports. Regular traffic, I'd called it. Vessels head in tow, and from Kodiak, Dutch Harbor, Anchorage, normal maritime activity. But what if it wasn't normal at all? What if every single one of those boats had been following distress signals? Signals that, right here from my station, broadcasting automated maydays, that would draw any decent captain toward Grid 77 Alpha to attempt rescue operations that would never succeed. The entity in the deep water didn't need to hunt. It had me doing the hunting for it. I yanked open the desk drawer, where I kept my incident reports. Page after page of logged vessel traffic, dating back 3 months to when I'd first arrived at Delta 7. Fishing vessel Northern Pride, heading southwest at 1400 hours. Cargo hauler Pacific Venture, altering course to southeast at 2230. Research vessel Endeavor. Cole had mentioned that name when she'd listed the missing ships. Research vessel Endeavor. 6 souls aboard. Disappeared in 2011, responding to the Phantom signal. But I had it logged here. Just last week, Pacific Endeavor, she'd identified herself, requesting weather information for the southeast quadrant. I'd given her thief a cast, wished her safe passage, standard radio traffic. Except there was no Pacific Endeavor. There was only research vessel Endeavor. Sitting on the ocean floor with 6 dead crew members, who'd been feeding that thing in the trench for 13 years. Every ship I'd logged, every routine radio check, every normal piece of maritime traffic, all of it had been the entity using stolen identities, stolen call signs, stolen voices, playing back conversations from crews that had been dead for years, creating the illusion of normal shipping activity to mask the constant stream of rescue vessels being drawn to their deaths. And I'd been the one broadcasting the bait. The radar screen showed 57 contacts now, all within 20 meters of my position. But as I watched, something changed. The contacts weren't moving toward Grid 77 Alpha anymore. They were moving toward me, toward Delta 7, because the entity had learned something new. It had been studying my transmissions for months, mapping my equipment, understanding my capabilities. And now it knew it didn't need to wait for rescue vessels to come to the deep water. It could bring the deep water to them. The station served as more than just a relay point. It was an amplification system, taking the entity's hunting calls and boosting them across hundreds of miles of shipping lanes. Every emergency frequency, every maritime channel, every Coast Guard communication network, all of it flowing through my equipment and out across the North Pacific. ensuring a steady supply of rescue vessels would always be heading toward their doom in the deep water off Kodiak Island. I stared at the equipment humming around me, finally understanding what I'd been feeding for the past 3 months. The thing in the trench didn't just mimic voices. It had turned me into its voice, broadcasting across the entire region, drawing in ships from every direction with signals that seemed to come from legitimate Coast Guard facilities, but led only to death in the abyssal depths, where something vast and hungry waited in the darkness.